You had unnamed coaches talking about title contenders or college football playoff contenders, I should say, Jimmy. Why did you choose the teams you chose as the potential college football playoff contenders?
Well, basically, because everybody else was choosing them. because I looked at the coaches poll and the AP poll, and those were the teams that were in the hunt or considered to be playoff teams. Now I excluded Tennessee from that because Tennessee was a separate article. Okay. About what the coaches said. There were one team for sure that I left out that I thought maybe I should have included or could have was Missouri. I may be wrong. I think they take a step back. I don't think they can go 11-2 again. And now their schedule to start is not very hard. I get that. And they got I think, a very good quarterback, a great wide receiver, but they don't have a running back that's the caliber of what Cody Schrader gave. I also don't think they're going to sneak up on anybody. And I think they did a little bit of that last year. That would be one team you could say, hey, why didn't you put them in there? Because they were 11-2 last year. I didn't have Oklahoma in there either. Oklahoma was, 6-7 2 years ago. They won 10 games last year. They don't have Dylan Gabriel. I think that's going to be a huge drop-off. They do have a highly rated quarterback. I don't think he's ready to flourish in that system the way Gabriel did. So I didn't have Oklahoma. Those are two you might could argue that I should have had in that group. But, basically, to answer your question, it was based on the coaches and AP poll.
Now, I wouldn't have had either of those. So I agree with you. I think both are going to have a bit of a down year. So let's talk about the ones that you do have. Let's go 4 downs because we have 4. Again, Tennessee is a separate story, but let's go 4 downs now and discuss the college football playoff contenders and what coaches think of their chances.
4 downs. 4 questions. 4 answers. The Dave Hooker Show.
4
downs. A presentation of OffTheHookSports.com.
All right, so we get rolling with Cooper Mays. Coop, what should people do?
Cooper Mays here. Hit like and subscribe.
Thanks, Coop. What down?
Coop here. First down.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say Georgia's a college football playoff contender. What did unnamed SEC coaches have to tell you about the Bulldogs?
First off, you're not out on a limb; you're on a tree, a sequoia. That they have great talent, that they have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. That even though they keep churning out NFL players that leave to go to the draft, they still have a wealth of talent there. And so, and then they got a really good running back transfer from Florida, Etienne. So they're just a well-balanced team with an outstanding quarterback, great talent, and a lot of them. I think a lot of them would argue with you. Georgia has the best talent in the SEC, and that perhaps only Ohio State challenges them for talent on the national level.
Yeah. And it's funny, Jimmy, you talked about, I see a lot of comments about Georgia's talent, and it seems like people are praising Kirby Smart for adapting to one quote was he adapted Nick Saban's personality. Do you think coaches in the fraternity are being unfair to Smart as seeing him as another clone of Nick Saban? Because let's just be honest, if Nick Saban's clones worked, there'd be a bunch of other national championship coaches all over college football, and there aren't. It's just Kirby Smart.
Yeah, let me try to separate those if I can. So I think what Kirby Smart did was he adopted a lot of the same philosophies that Saban had about recruiting, about your practice habits, about your game planning, and so forth. But what they also said was, unlike some of the other Saban disciples, he didn't try to be Nick Saban. He was his own personality. 2 guys that failed at it that tried to be Nick Saban, Tennessee could tell you about them, Derek Dooley and Jeremy Pruitt. They came in and tried to act like Saban without the resume, and that didn't work. And actually, very few Saban disciples have done well, Kirby Smart the exception, because they keep trying to act like Saban, and they're not Saban. And he's kind of gruff around the edges there a lot. So if you don't have his cachet, then a lot of these players aren't going to listen to you. So I think if you separate the two, but as far as, yes, he adopted a lot of the system of what Saban ran successfully. but he's also been his own person. And I think that's been one reason he's succeeded where other Saban disciples have not.
Okay, let me ask you this, Jimmy. One attribute that he had best have in common, I believe, with Nick Saban is Nick Saban's ability to adjust. Mm-hmm. And the most obvious example would be hiring Lane Kiffin. Nobody thought that was going to happen. Does Kirby Smart have that? Because he's at a point where I think off-field issues and discipline have become something he needs to be concerned about. Do we know if he has the ability to adjust to some things that maybe aren't working at the current time?
On defense, I would say absolutely. I think he's got great players, but he did it at Alabama. And in fact, they demoted at least one or two defensive coordinators at Alabama to give the job to Kirby Smart because he was so good at that, and Saban recognized it. Offensively, I think he's adjusted some. He doesn't just ground and pound at Georgia, and he's thrown the ball around. Heck, even Stetson Bennett threw it around a little bit when they needed to. Carson Beck's one of the best quarterbacks in the country, I think. So he will throw the ball and open it up a little bit more and not be as conservative. How well does he adjust on offense? That's hard for me to answer. He doesn't do a whole lot different than what people do, except I think he really gets really good players. And if you're really good, I think you can be a little bit more vanilla on offense. You just have to execute. And if you do that, you'll be pretty good against most defenses.
Let me set you up for the next team, Caleb. There are actually 5 contenders, so we're going to have a 5th down like the old Colorado days, if that's okay, Jim.
Yes, Colorado would appreciate that.
Second down, Caleb.
Cooper Mays here. Second down.
All right, so Jimmy, I want to go. You started on this with Alabama, and it does seem like there's a lot of belief in Kalen DeBoer, but there's something that stood out from a quote because this coach, whoever they are, is saying what I've been saying, which is that they are a little concerned about how Jaylen Mio fits with Kalen DeBoer's offense because it said Jaylen is a different style quarterback than Michael Penix Jr. But he did say he doesn't think that will be a factor. So I guess my question is, where do you think coaches see this? Because I still think as good of an offensive coach as I think Kalen DeBoer is, he does not. He coaches pocket passers. He doesn't coach first read and run quarterbacks like Jaylen Mio.
Yeah, and look, I'll admit this. When Kalen DeBoer started out coaching at a small school in South Dakota, I have no idea what his quarterback did. And then he went to Fresno State. To be honest with you, I don't know what he did. I know what they did at Washington, and that was he had a very accurate passer, and he threw it all over the park, and they were fantastic. I think that's a challenge for him, though. Milroe is not a pocket passer. He has got to run the football to be successful. Maybe a little bit. He's more like, for example, Jalen Hurts than Tua Tagovailoa. So I think that is going to be a bit of a challenge for him, and maybe he's up to it. Maybe he can handle that. One coach is very high on his ability to coach, and so he thinks he'll be able to adjust with Milroe as his quarterback. But now if he's smart, he will design the offense around Milroe's skill level and not try to make him a quarterback that throws 40 passes a game.
All right, let's go to the next down. Coop, where are we?
Tennessee center Cooper Mays here. Third down.
Thanks, Coop. Texas. Of all these teams, I have the least feel for Texas. Of all the contenders, I could see them going either direction. Now, as far as some unnamed coaches and what they told you, Texas, this is a quote, Texas is at the point where they reload like Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. They're close to being able to win the SEC. And yes, they're a college football playoff team. So that should answer my concerns. It seemed like the coaches were very high on Steve Sarkisian and Texas.
Yeah, and I'm not ready to put Texas in that reloading at the Georgia-Alabama level, in part because their one-loss record wouldn't suggest they've done that through the years, right?
Right.
I mean, last year they had a great year. The year before they won 8 games. The year before, I think they may have even had a losing record or right at 500. So I'm not sure if I would go there. I do think they have a very talented team. I think they have a really good quarterback. I think they've already lost 2 running backs, but they do have a very good third back that they'll rely on. Receivers, they've had to go to the portal to get some help there. I think they have a lot of talent. But here's the thing about Texas, typically, not necessarily last year. They typically lose a game or 2 they're not supposed to lose. And they've had trouble winning consistently against the elite teams on their schedule. I think in the SEC, they're going to find that, okay, boy, Mississippi State's not supposed to be very good. But then they go to Starkville, and they're in a fight for their life to try to beat them. Because week in and week out, the SEC teams are better than what Texas was facing before in the Big 12. So I could see somebody along the way upsetting them. I do think Sarkisian's a terrific offensive mind, and I think that he has rehabbed his way into being a really good head coach. So I think they're a very good team, but I got a sneaking suspicion they're going to lose a game, maybe 2, that you don't expect them to lose.
Hey, Caleb, let me jump in there on one thing, because Jimmy has close ties to the Manning family. If I made you bet a week's pay, and you're retired, so I don't know what that is, but if I made you bet a week's pay,
$100 a week.
Coop Manning ends his career at Texas or not, what would you bet?
That's a really good question. I'm going to say he ends his career at Texas because he's not going to play this year. I thought if he was going to leave, he would have left this year. So Quinn Ewers is going to leave after this year, right?
You think? Yes.
And March Manning's going to be a quarterback for the next 2 years. So I'm going to say he stays. I also think they have the Manning family, has a very high opinion of Sarkisian as an offensive mind and as a quarterback developer. So I think he's going to stay at Texas.
He's actually, he's done a lot with his career where I thought it was over with all that happened at Southern California. Set you up right now, Caleb. 4th down.
All SEC center Cooper Mays here. 4th down.
See, Jimmy, do you notice how Cooper gets a little bit better? He's just Cooper at first, and then by the end, he's all SEC center.
Yeah, and his tempo is really good. Yeah.
his excitement level is through the roof, too.
Right.
He's like, you really want me to record this? Yes, it'll be funny. Go ahead, Caleb.
So, Jimmy, we'll go to LSU on this 4th down because it seems like the questions about LSU from coaches are the same ones I have, which is I'll just tell you right now, I thought LSU was poised for a dynasty with Brian Kelly because this is the first smart coach they've had since Nick Saban. And I was like, the potential is unlimited in that state. But it's after year 2, Brian Kelly, who started his career as a defensive coordinator, has totally mismanaged this defense. And he hired a new defensive coordinator. You bring up they made a great move hiring. One coach said they made a great move hiring a defensive line coach. But it seems like coaches are it seems like they don't know what to make of LSU's defense this year, whether or not they're going to improve. They seem as lost on that as we do with all the staff changes they've made.
Yeah, Davis, the defensive line coach, one of the coaches I talked to is extremely high on him, thought it was a great hire for LSU to get him. And then the defensive coordinator is Baker. They poached him from Missouri, where last year he did an excellent job. So that's going to be the key. The key to me is coaching on the defense. They had a lot of bust a year ago, and they may even had players playing out of position like Harold Perkins. But, Caleb, I think they have the talent. Now, I don't think they have elite talent. I don't think it's Georgia elite, but it's really good. And you can't – it's hard to screw it up at LSU because of all the players that come out of Louisiana. So I think it had more to do with scheme than personnel. And so I see a much improved LSU defense, not a championship level defense, but a much better defense than they had a year ago.
Okay, Coop, what down? This is Cooper Mays. I'm the coolest guy in the world. It's 5th down.
They're like, that is total bullshit.
Okay, for the record, the guy we're going to name, the school we're going to name on 5th down is led by a head coach who, if anybody could finagle getting a 5th down, it would be this guy.
It is Lane Kiffin. And I don't make it a habit out of reading your stories, Jimmy, the full thing during the show, but I'm going to read a good bit now if you can bear with me. You said, quote, from one coach, what Lane Kiffin has done at Ole Miss is magical. Lane has put all his marbles and money into this year. He's done as good a job as anyone in college football, the way he's turned that program around. If he gets into the 12th college football playoff, it's one of the greatest jobs in college football. Remember, Ole Miss never won the West and hasn't won the SEC since 1963. Skip down a little bit. Quote, there's so much turnover there in terms of players, it's hard to win consistently at a high level. Lane Kiffin will give some people fits, but 2 or 3 times a year, Ole Miss doesn't look like the same team, to be honest. Continued quote, every portal guy that comes in brings his culture with him. He doesn't always adapt to your culture. What kind of effect does that have on the locker room? Michigan State 1 year struck gold. The next year, disaster. That's just not sustainable, Jimmy. And it makes me think that Lane Kiffin's not going to be at Ole Miss the moment he has success, which could be this year.
Yeah, I think he would look for a better job if he can find one, and he's positioned himself to do that. Ole Miss's football history, they've had very, very few 10-win seasons. And Kiffin's has he had 2 at Ole Miss, 10-win seasons?
Yes.
That is a heck of a job at Ole Miss. Now, having said that, my opinion of Kiffin, and this, I understand this goes back to 2009. He didn't give a rat about culture. He cared about talent. So he was in the portal. I think he looks out and I'm going to get the best players I can. And he doesn't worry about culture. He then coaches them and tries to get the best out of them. But when you do that, you could run into some people that don't fit your culture, that create dissension in the locker room. Here's another thing about Ole Miss. How many big games have they won in the regular season? How many times did they beat Alabama under Kiffin, or Georgia under Kiffin, or LSU under Kiffin? Now, I'm not saying he's been shut out, but I think what he does, he rarely loses to somebody he's supposed to beat, but he has not fared really well against the elite teams on his schedule. Is this the year they do it? Maybe. And they lost a great running back. He went to Ohio State. But he's also fortified his defense. His defense is pretty good. So I'm just curious, can they get over the hump against the best teams on their schedule? I'm going to cheat right quick and look at their schedule. That would include LSU in Baton Rouge, Oklahoma at home, Georgia at home. Those would be the 3. If he can win one of those, I think he's got a good chance to be in the college football playoff.
Jimmy, last thing, I know we're keeping you long. If you could just rank those, and include Tennessee if you don't mind, rank those teams as in terms of likelihood of making the playoff.
Well, Georgia's number 1 on that list for me. I'm gonna, even though I've mentioned I think Texas is gonna have a stumble along the way, I would go Texas just because I do think they have outstanding talent, a very good quarterback. Next on my list, I'm going to probably go with Kalen DeBoer in Alabama, since he's done such a great job everywhere he's been. He's a very confident guy, and I think he's going to get them in the playoffs. My next one is, I'm going to go Ole Miss. That would be my next one. Even though
LSU.
Yeah, over LSU.
Okay.
Yeah. LSU scares me a little bit. Now, I'll say this. I think Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback's really good, but he doesn't give you the running ability, the running threat that Jaden Daniels gave him. But he is a terrific passer. So I'm going to go LSU and then Ole Miss. That's going to be my top 5 in order.
Jimmy, thank you so much. It's almost football season. It's exciting, and thank you for all you do. The articles are just phenomenal, and people that haven't checked them out, they should read those. Anything else you got coming this week that you want to tease forward?
Yeah, we've got so on my podcast that I'm doing on Full Disclosure on the Rewind, this part 2 of Tim Irwin. I mean, part 1 where he told me that he wanted to go beat up Johnny Majors after Majors told him he wasn't good enough to eat in the mess hall. I thought that was pretty interesting. So we got part 2 of that. The next one I've got, I know it's not football, but the next one is Ben Testerman. He's the best junior tennis player the state of Tennessee's ever seen. One of the best junior tennis players ever. The U.S. Open tennis tournament's next week, which is where I'm going to be. We're going to run that next week because it coincides with the U.S. Open. And then after that, we're going to be football-centric with a lot of our interviews on the Rewind.
I know you've always wanted to go to the U.S. Open. That seems like the coolest darn event.
I went a year ago.
Oh, you did?
Really enjoyed it. This will be my second trip. And I can't wait to get up there. You're going to see some fantastic matches. And then I went to a night match, and let me tell you, I know that football fans like to engage in adult beverages. Well, at the U.S. Open in tennis at night, they really like to engage in adult beverages. So it made the atmosphere kind of fun.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that. I'll be up there about 4 days. I'm going to the tennis twice, but I'm looking forward to that, and it should be a fun trip.
Any other columns coming up for Off the Hook Sports that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I've debated whether to break it in two. I'll talk to you about that later, but I've got comments about the non-college football playoff teams. And there's some really interesting comments, and there's some biting comments as well, which if I use their name, they would never do this. So yeah, they're a little bit braver. It's like some people behind that fake Twitter names, but
yeah,
so,
you've got a bunch of this. And I really thought kind of the flip side that people were incredibly complimentary of Josh Heupel, because you don't want to give your opponent credit, but I thought they did that because they didn't have to use their names. Kind of the flip side. You usually get the bad stuff when they don't have to use their names, but you got a lot of the good stuff about Josh Heupel because they didn't want to use their names.
Yeah. And so, but that's a part of it. And I've been using the same coaches for many, many years. I just hope they don't leave the SEC. So I have to develop new sources.